Think about how resistance is usually treated where you work. Does that approach invite engagement or shut it down? In most leadership settings, we are trained to respond to challenges with a problem-solution mindset. When a problem comes up, we address it, solve it, and move on. However, resistance to change is not just another problem waiting to be fixed. Resistance is a dilemma, and dilemmas follow different rules. Unlike problems, dilemmas do not have a clean, final resolution. They require active management, thoughtful navigation, and sometimes uncomfortable patience. This distinction is important. In fact, it matters a lot. Resistance is never random. It always reflects someone trying to protect or preserve something meaningful to them. In AIM, we call this the frame of reference. Every person operates from a frame of reference, their own internal story about how the world used to work, how it works now, and how it should work in the future. This frame of reference provides structure. It helps people make decisions. It offers a sense of stability when everything else feels uncertain. So when someone resists change, it is not necessarily an act of defiance or disengagement. It is a signal, and it is an important one. Resistance does not always show up in logical ways, but if we pause and listen, it will always tell us something worth hearing. Here is something unexpected. Resistance is actually essential. You cannot have innovation without resistance, and we would not even need change management if resistance did not exist. So, let's look at this from a different angle. What if resistance is not about you at all? It is not a reflection of your communication plan. It is not a sign that you are not smart enough, credible enough, or prepared enough. Resistance is a process. It is something people go through, not something they are doing to you. Resistance is how people protect their frame of reference, that internal model of how the world should work. The more disruption we introduce to that model, the more resistance we will encounter. Our goal is not to eliminate resistance. Our goal is to understand it, to manage it, and to stop taking it personally. Even when people agree with the direction of change, resistance can still emerge. Let's examine why. Every person and every organization is wired to maintain stability. We crave predictability because it demands less energy to function. But change disrupts that balance. Even when people like the change, if it affects their habits, their relationships, their roles, or their routines, you will still encounter resistance. That's because resistance isn't a matter of whether something is good or bad. It's a reaction to disruption. It's a natural response to instability and uncertainty. And that means resistance isn't optional, it's inevitable. Here's the truth. The most effective organizations are not free of resistance. They're filled with resistance and skilled at managing it. So the real-world questions we need to ask are: how much resistance are we likely to face? What will it cost us if we ignore it? And most importantly, how are we going to manage it? We're moving forward, now with a better grasp of what resistance really signals and how to address it productively. First, resistance is inevitable. Second, it's not always logical. Or maybe more accurately, what seems logical to you might not feel logical at all to someone else. If logic alone could stop resistance, we'd all be healthy, happy, and completely caffeine-free. And if I'm being honest, about 80% of my lifestyle would vanish. So here's the takeaway. The person resisting your change, they're not working off your logic. That perfectly crafted message you've been working so hard on, it's not going to fix this. Close your laptop and go to sleep. That message doesn't exist. Because resistance is a function of disruption, not a failure of explanation. A communication plan is not. an implementation plan. And here's the surprising part. Resistance isn't a sign of disloyalty. More often, it's a sign that people care. People resist because something important to them is being touched, not because they want to sabotage the change. All resistance is a way of protecting the frame of reference we've each built to survive. So don't try to fight it. Take the time to understand it. So, what if resistance isn't actually the enemy? What if resistance is a signal we need to pay attention to? It could be a sign that change is still possible. It could mean there's still an opportunity to influence. Let's flip the perspective for a moment. If there's no resistance at all, you might assume that's a good thing. But in reality, that's actually a red flag. If no one is resisting, one of two things is probably happening. Either no one is truly changing, or the resistance has simply gone underground. And underground resistance is the most dangerous kind. It's harder to see, harder to manage, and far more expensive. So instead of seeing resistance as something you have to defeat, try thinking about it differently. This isn't a boxing match. It's not a street fight. It's more like Aikido or Judo. You don't fight the energy, you redirect it. You work with the momentum, both theirs and yours, to move the change forward. Now that we've redefined resistance as energy we can work with, let's talk about how to predict it. The truth is, resistance rarely catches us off guard if we know what to look for. Start by selecting one specific group in your organization, a group that's directly impacted by a particular change. Then ask yourself, can I step into their frame of reference? There are 9 specific conditions that increase the likelihood of resistance. Even one of them can create friction, but the more that apply, the stronger the resistance will be. Let's walk through the first 4. Number 1. Low perceived need. If people don't believe the change is necessary, especially for them, resistance will increase. They may agree that other teams need to change, but if they don't see why they need to, you'll hit a wall. Numbers 2, 3, and 4 often show up together. Unclear expectations, unknown outcomes, and negative impacts. It all comes down to fear of the unknown. And here's something powerful to remember. The pain of uncertainty is often greater than the certainty of pain. That's why people stay in bad jobs or unhealthy relationships. It's not the destination that scares them, it's the first step. Let's keep going. Number 5. It seems irreversible. If people believe there's no turning back, resistance kicks in hard. Call something a pilot, and you'll get some pushback. Call it permanent, and resistance spikes. Number 6. Low reward and high cost. This boils down to one classic question: what's in it for me? If people can't see a personal benefit, they'll push back, no matter how strategic or visionary the change is. Number 7. High disruption. The more a change disrupts routines, expected behaviors, or deeply held values, the more resistance it creates. Number 8. Low involvement. If people feel the change is happening to them, rather than with them, they will resist. Involvement creates a sense of control. Take that away, and resistance rises quickly. And finally, number 9. The change implies poor past performance. If people interpret the change as a judgment on how they did their jobs in the past, they'll defend that past, sometimes fiercely. So, think back to the group you selected. How many of these 9 conditions apply to them? 4, 5? That's more than enough to seriously slow down your implementation, unless you've built a readiness plan that takes it into account. Now is a good time to step back and look at the big picture. What actually determines whether a change takes hold or fizzles out? Using AIM, we've studied thousands of implementations, and nearly all the variables boil down to two factors: implementation climate and organizational readiness. Let's start with implementation climate. Think of it like the weather pattern inside your organization. You may already use employee opinion or engagement surveys, but from an implementation standpoint, only two readings truly matter: organizational stress and implementation history. Organizational stress refers to how many initiatives are competing for limited time, attention, and energy, plus the disruption they cause. Implementation history is essentially your organization's memory. If past changes were painful, ignored, or half-baked, people remember. And so does their resistance. Think of resistance like a savings bond. If you don't resolve it, it matures with interest. Unmanaged resistance slows you down, not just on this change, but on the next one too. It stacks up like unpaid credit card debt. So we manage resistance not for emotional comfort, but for operational speed. Now let's talk about organizational readiness. It's not just a warm and fuzzy concept. There are four real levers that define readiness: sponsor capacity, target readiness, cultural fit, and agent capacity. Let's break each of those down. Sponsor capacity is the commitment, time, and visibility of your leaders. Target readiness refers to how prepared your targets are and how much resistance they're showing. Cultural fit asks whether the values of the change align with how your organization usually behaves. And agent capacity is about whether the people leading the charge have the credibility and skills to carry it through. Here's your spoiler alert: sponsor capacity matters the most. And agent capacity, it matters the least. Even if your change agents are fantastic, they can't compensate for weak or absent sponsorship. Sponsors control the pace. Agents execute the tactics. If your implementation climate is stormy, you'll need more time and a more targeted strategy to build readiness. But if the skies are clearer, you'll move faster. Now let's bring it back to those 9 resistance triggers and connect the dots between climate, readiness, and what you'll face on the ground. This is a good point to connect everything we've discussed to the AIM roadmap. You'll notice one key step near the bottom: developing target readiness. Now, important note: the AIM roadmap isn't a step-by-step checklist. It's not linear. It's a dashboard. It helps you sense where the real risks are and tells you where to spend your time and energy. And if you've been tracking with the earlier points, here's the theme: resistance is inevitable, and it's not always logical. So what actually drives readiness? It's not just what you say. It's what people see. It's what actually gets reinforced. Let me be direct. I've had clients proudly show me their resistance management plan, and it's just a communications calendar. Communication is important, but it's only about 15% of readiness. That means the other 85%, it's coming from somewhere else. And more than half of that 85% lives in the light blue box, developing reinforcement. Put simply, if you don't change what gets reinforced, you won't get the change. You can't keep rewarding the old behavior and expect the new one to stick. This is where behavior science kicks in. Anytime you see a behavior repeated, there is, or there was, a reward for it. So when people resist, don't just explain harder. Don't just launch a new memo. Ask yourself, from their frame of reference, does the old behavior still feel like the right move? If it does, they'll stay with it. So yes, Develop your communication plan. Yes, set clear expectations. But if you want people to move, you have to shift what's being reinforced. That's what creates real readiness, and that's what accelerates implementation. A few years ago, a client said to me, "We want to build a model that delivers 100% readiness across the organization." That's not possible, but it's a great place to start the conversation. Readiness is made up of 5 key factors. Let's walk through them. Number 1. Information. People need to understand the context, the strategy, the goals, the impact. But it's not just about sending messages. It's about creating feedback loops. Every message out should bring resistance back in. Number 2. Willingness. What's the motivation to change? Does it solve a real problem or offer a win? We need reinforcement that makes the new more attractive than the current. Number 3. Ability. Do they have the time, the tools, the skills? Have we created safe spaces to practice before the stakes get high? Number 4. Confidence. Do they believe this can succeed based on what they've seen before? Do they trust the people leading it? And number 5. Involvement. Control. Were they consulted? Even a small voice in the process creates a sense of control and reduces resistance. Even if you do all 5 of those perfectly, you still have to subtract 2 things. First, the disruption from the target's point of view. Second, the effort required to surface and manage resistance. Both take time. Both take resources. So no, you'll never get to 100% readiness. But you can get close enough to implement successfully. If you plan for it, reinforce it, and leave room for the unexpected. Readiness isn't about perfection. It's about preparation with enough margin to lead through resistance. Let's zoom in on how resistance really works, because most of the time, it doesn't show up wearing a name tag. A lot of what looks like organizational resistance, things like budget constraints, policy barriers, or time limits, is actually individual resistance in disguise. It's easier for someone to say, "This doesn't align with our strategy," than to admit, "I'm overwhelmed, and I'm scared this might not work." So how do we uncover what's really going on? Try removing the stated barrier, just hypothetically. If someone says, "It's too expensive," ask, "If it were cheaper, would we move forward?" If the answer is, "Yes, but," you're hearing individual resistance hiding behind a safer frame. And here's the kicker. Money is rarely the real issue, not for sponsors who actually want something to happen. If it matters, they'll find the budget. So when resistance hides behind logic, you've got to shift into the individual's frame of reference. And that's where resistance gets personal. It can show up in different domains. Knowledge if the change contradicts what they believe is true. Values if it challenges something core to who they are. Behavior when they're being asked to act differently. And emotion which, let's be honest, is often the biggest driver. Fear, loss, uncertainty. Here's the mistake we often make. We treat resistance like a knowledge issue and throw more communication at it. But communication only works for one slice: knowledge. Most resistance lives in values, behaviors, and emotions, and you can't logic someone out of fear. So what does resistance actually look like? It can be overt, visible and vocal, covert, silent and hidden, active, direct opposition, inactive, passive inertia. People don't argue, they just don't move. It can even be unconscious. They may not know why they're resisting, or even that they're resisting at all. That's why we say resistance is like an iceberg. You might see a little above the waterline, but most of it is buried beneath the surface. So your job: find the resistance, even when it's quiet, even when it's masked. And whatever you do, don't assume training will fix it. Training only helps with overt, active, conscious ability gaps, but most of the time, you're not dealing with ability. You're dealing with willingness. And that's why readiness planning has to cover both. Ability, with training; willingness, with reinforcement. If you're only planning for one, you're flying with one wing. This is what makes implementation real-world complex and real-world interesting. Because out there, you'll face every combination of resistance, and your plans, they need to meet people where they are. We've laid the groundwork, now it all starts to come together. When you're building readiness, you're managing two forces. Ability, what people can do; willingness, what they're motivated to do. If someone lacks ability, we train. If they lack willingness, we reinforce. But here's the costly mistake we see over and over. We send people with motivation gaps to training. We say things like, maybe if Joe takes the class again, he'll finally get it. But Joe doesn't need more instruction. He needs a reason to care. So, before approving another round of training, ask yourself, are we actually addressing both ability and willingness? Training gives people skills, but only reinforcement makes those skills stick. Let's circle back to resistance for one last point. It's not always loud. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's strategic. And sometimes the person doesn't even know they're doing it. Your job is to find the resistance, not blame it, not fear it, just surface it. And once you do ask, is this, I don't know how, or I don't want to? Because here's the truth. Adults don't learn when they're too confident or too comfortable. So, if you want your training to land, motivation has to come first. That's the real work of readiness and the foundation of real implementation. Here's a simple model that explains how resistance forms, even when people start out excited about the change. This isn't a negative change. It isn't something being forced on them. It's the kind of change people actually ask for, the kind they want. And here's the twist. Even then, people move through a predictable curve. To make it real, let's use something personal. Let's talk about marriage. It starts with what we call uninformed certainty. There are high expectations and very little actual data. Then reality sets in. You start to notice the habits, the quirks, the surprises, and they don't put the top back on the toothpaste. Now you've entered informed doubt. That's where resistance shows up. Not because the change is bad, but because expectations are shifting. If you can manage through that trough, I can live with the toothpaste and other quirks. You reach informed hope, and finally, satisfaction or completion. But this isn't just about marriage. This curve shows up in every organization too. Even when the change is popular, you still hit that dip. So, here's the takeaway. Change is not an event. It's not the launch day. It's what happens after the launch. The deepest resistance, the kind that demands leadership, visibility, and reinforcement, comes in that dip. That isn't failure. That is the rhythm of resistance. Your job isn't to erase it. It is to help people navigate through it. One of the most useful things about AING is that it gives us real diagnostic data to understand where resistance is coming from. That means we're not guessing. We can pinpoint resistance factors and target them by group, role, or even individual. You can assess readiness by identifying disruptions to someone's frame of reference. Ask yourself, are we challenging their knowledge, their values, their behaviors, or their emotions? Once we know which frame is being disrupted, we can predict and manage resistance more effectively. Now, what actually works to manage it? When someone doesn't change after you've explained the rationale twice, you're not facing confusion. You're facing resistance. And at that point, your job is to shift into their frame of reference. Ask yourself, how does this change impact them? What don't they want to lose? What can we do to work this out? Trying to pressure them into compliance won't work. Beating them into submission? It only deepens the resistance. Here's the key. Once you've explained the why, take up no more than 25% of the airtime. The rest? It's about listening, building rapport, and finding a win-win even if it's temporary. Now that win-win might not always be possible, but that's the goal. And just because it works once doesn't mean you're done. You'll likely need to do it again and again after that. If you can't find the resistance, you've already lost control. Your logic and their logic, they are not the same. So, your communication plan, as clear and thoughtful as it may be, might explain the change. But it will not eliminate resistance. In fact, if you argue with the target while they're trying to share their perception, you're not resolving the resistance. You're increasing it. And that's the turning point. Resistance isn't a one-and-done moment. It's a process. Managing resistance means cyclically and iteratively shifting their frame of reference, not just pushing yours. Here's what I want to leave you with. Resistance is not a surprise. It's not a personal failure. It's not something to avoid or ignore. It's a signal, a form of communication. And the faster you learn to find it, decode it, and respond to it, the faster you move from installation to real implementation. Whether it's fear, fatigue, confusion, or values in conflict, your job isn't to fight resistance. It's to manage it with tools, with rapport, and with enough structure to keep things moving forward. That is where the real change happens.